Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this wonderful day, and wherever it is that you're joining us from around the world. Thank you, as always, for all of your support. We appreciate all the likes, the shares, the follows. Thank you so much for interacting with our content. As you know, we do what we do for you to bring you some amazing conversations so our education space can continue to grow and we continue to amplify many voices and many perspectives. I want to give a big shout out to our sponsors. I want to give a shout out to Book Creator. Thank you so much for your support. Eduaide and Yellowdig as well for believing in our mission of bringing you these conversations week in and week out. So thank you for all that you do. And today I'm very excited to have a two-time guest. And you may be saying, well, Fonz, you already had a four-time guest. You've got two-time guests and so on. Well, it's because that's the way the show works. Sometimes, I want to catch up with my previous guests, especially now in the age of AI in education, and I want to get their perspectives so they can bring in their expertise, amplify their voices, and give them a platform to share their knowledge and their practices and their perspectives. So I would love to welcome to the show Jen Manley. Thank you, Jen, for joining me here today. How are you this evening?
I'm great. I'm excited. I know you said two-time guest, but we're having a really different conversation. So I think it's going to be great.
Yes, absolutely. And a very different conversation for sure. But Jen, for our guests that are watching right now, or listeners that may not be familiar with the first show that we did as far as that topic is concerned, if you can give us a little brief introduction of what your context is in the education space.
Totally. Yeah. So my name is Jen Manley. I have been in education for, I don't know, 13 years now, something like that. It feels like it has not been that long. I started as a middle school computer science teacher. I taught high school computer science, and now I teach a course at the University of Maryland every semester. The current course I'm teaching is gender, race, and computing. So it's a really interesting class. My context in education, I create content to help teachers work less without sacrificing their effectiveness. I believe in keeping great teachers in the profession. And the way that I kind of attack that problem is by thinking about how we can apply productivity science to the work that we do, and then also like setting boundaries around our time and viewing teaching as, teachers as professionals. But my context for this episode and what we're going to be talking about is I have been teaching about the ethics of AI as a computer science teacher. I've taught it to middle, high school, and now college students for the last 8 years, 2018. So about 4 years before ChatGPT was released to the general public. And something I'm really passionate about is helping educators use AI and view AI from I would say like ethical lens, but really more being critical about when we're using it, understanding that it is a tool, but also that it's not a net neutral tool. So I'm excited to talk with you about it today.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about it too, as well, because one of the reasons that we're talking about it just prior to recording the show is really a particular post that really stuck out. And I know that we'll get into it because, just like you mentioned right now, you definitely share a lot of great content as how to be very critical of AI and when to use it and when it has its place, and maybe some, when you just could do a basic Google search to do something like that as far as research or finding something out. And so we'll get into that. But I want to ask you, I know that you've been doing this since 2018 as far as teaching computer science, the ethics of AI, working with middle school, high school, and then, of course, higher ed. I want to ask you, and let's go back to November of 2022 when the news broke out. It's like, hey, ChatGPT is available. What was your initial reaction and your initial thoughts as you heard the news? And of course, this is being released.
Yeah. So I would say my initial thoughts, well, I guess I can't pinpoint exactly when it was released, but I want to look at the first 2 months right after. I was really concerned because it came out and there was this mass accepting of it, especially in the education space, without any context or consideration of a lot of the critical components of AI that we in the computer science space have been talking about for years. And I think back to December of 2022, January of 2023, and I'm watching EdTech experts, people who have been in EdTech for a very long time, starting to come out and publish books on using AI in education. And I just remember feeling like I have been teaching this for 4 years at this point, and I would not consider myself an expert. At the time, I feel pretty confident in my own prompt engineering, right? But at that time, I was not using it and programming it in the way that all of these experts at Google, Amazon, like people in the tech space had been using AI for much longer than that. Lots of people had been very critical. And so it was surprising and also concerning when ChatGPT was released publicly that in the education space, particularly, it came off as a mass acceptance. And to me, it was surprising because I don't feel like that is the energy that we have for most things in education. Like most things in education, it takes us time to fully accept, right? Like I think about, I was on a national curriculum writing team. We wrote that curriculum for a year. We then piloted it for a year with teachers in a classroom before we then released an updated version of that curriculum to, for the masses. And so I think is a mix of concern and surprise. And then also understanding that this is something our students immediately had access to. And so what are you doing to make sure that students are still understanding how to use it responsibly and that it's not detracting from their overall education experience?
Oh,
I know
yeah,
that was
you're
a lot.
no, no, no. It was actually perfect because it was actually very similar views. And I don't know, it's very weird. And I had Rob Nelson on the show a couple of episodes back, and we're talking a little bit about the AI fight club, where you've got really two sides. You've got those that are all in and gun ho, and then some that are a little bit more, cautious. Well, maybe I consider myself more kind of trying to be in the middle, obviously,
Mhm.
because I love to bring both sides of the conversation to the table. But then there's also the other side where it's like, no, 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 like we're going too fast, which is something that I truly believe in too, as well. This whole move fast and break things doesn't really work. And, we've seen a lot of things that have kind of failed. We've seen some things that show some promise. But at the same time, it's like, who's really to decide, like, yes, this is going to be very effective and this is going to be the solution to education's problems? Because I always go back and I always say, well, there really isn't anything new under the sun. I remember people feeling the same way about the internet, people feeling the same way about iPads in the classroom and then Chromebooks. And these are going to be the things that are going to, drive up test scores and are going to revolutionize education. And it just seems like, yes, at the very beginning, there was a huge acceptance, which was very scary because everybody just started jumping in and diving in and not being very cautious to the other side. As far as I always focus on the data privacy side, I always focus
Mhm.
on,
Yeah.
protecting our children, all that data that goes in. And then obviously too, my biggest thing is, do parents know? I know that parents may be familiar with this, but do parents know that this is being used in schools and this needs to go past just the tech form that you sign at the beginning of the year and say, hey,
Absolutely.
you can opt out if you don't want your child to use this, because again, it's protecting them too as well. But I think it came in at a time with, dealing with burnout, dealing with
Mhm.
poor teacher retention. And then everybody jumps on the boat saying, yep, this is going to be it. This is going to personalize the learning. This is going to figure exactly what is wrong with each student and give them exactly what they need to be able to, succeed. That's really what teachers, we want our students to succeed. But at what cost? And is it really going to be effective? And so, I know the last conversation that we had, we were talking and dealing about how can teachers, fight burnout. And you talk about agile, uh, what is it? Agile, what's the word? It's okay
Project
because we can cut
management.
this.
Yeah.
What is it?
It's called Scrum, but
There you
it's like
go.
project management.
I know in our previous episode, we talked about, project management, like kind of like Scrum Master, using agile to do that. And so what I see here is people that are really saying like, hey, we can just easily put a student on a computer. It's going to figure out exactly what they need and we can all take it from there. And that's it. And then of course, now we got the other sides like, no, no, we need that human connection. We need all of this human connectivity as far as making sure that the teacher is still present, they're active, they're engaging students. So we're seeing so many different perspectives. But I want to ask you, because I know the previous show we talked about, project management, and it just seems like, hey, this product, it's going to help you just manage your classroom, and it's going to manage your workload. And you really just come in and you need a worksheet. Hey, just prompt it and I can make you 1,000 worksheets in 30 seconds. So I want to ask you about that now in your perspective and in your classroom experience, and maybe what you have seen, both at the middle school, high school, and even higher ed level. What is it that you're seeing now as far as teachers' acceptance of this? Is it really making their lives a lot easier? Is it really making them productive?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I spoke about this at iTech Iowa in October of last year. And one of the things that I think like a good first question for teachers is this actually going to make you faster? Right? Like there are certain tasks that teachers are outsourcing to AI that it is faster to outsource it to AI. And the product that AI is giving you is something that is going to be, usable in your classroom, that's going to make sense for your students. So a good example of this is like creating a rubric, right? You have created an assignment. You want it to create a rubric for you that you're going to use to assess students. That is a very easy task for a Claude or ChatGPT, right? And we're not dealing with data privacy. So that might be a situation where a teacher, I think about when I was teaching middle school, I had 4 preps and none of them, I had anybody else teaching them, right? So I had 230 students, 4 unique preps, 2 of them didn't have curriculum. And I was a first and second year teacher that was all on my own because there were only 3 other teachers in the entire district that were teaching any of the classes that I was teaching, right? And I think back to where I was then, being able to outsource creating the rubric would have actually been extremely helpful, right? Being able to outsource potentially a worksheet, right? Like I wanted to make me a note catcher. That is something that is very helpful and is much quicker than how I could do it for myself. The challenge is that a lot of teachers, I guess I shouldn't say a lot, some teachers are looking at AI and they're saying, well, if it can help me with this thing, then I want to use it for everything. And this is, I think, the post that you saw from me, right? Where I was saying, don't use AI for things that you can Google. And there's lots of reasons for that. But to me, the number one reason is it's actually less efficient. Like if you're trying to save time, but maybe you're not great at prompt engineering, you're going to go back and forth with ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, system you're going to use. Let's actually be critical of how much time using this tool is taking us. And maybe there are things, and certainly for teachers, there are a lot of things that you can do faster yourself, right? You can do faster because you already have a template that you've used for other units and you're just going to reuse it, right? And so I think like that's number one is there are absolutely things that AI can help teachers be more productive, to help teachers be more efficient, do it more quickly. And then there are other things that it's less efficient to use AI. It's not giving you the output that you want. It's not creating output that's friendly for kids. Or like you talked about, and this is actually a big concern of mine, it doesn't actually consider the fact that we're using student data in ways that students cannot consent to us using, or their parents don't really understand to be able to give informed consent.
Yeah, excellent. And so you hit on a couple of things that I do want to talk about too as well. And that sense of, over reliance on it. You mentioned something like, if I can use it for this, well, then that means I can use it for this and this and this. And, essentially the way that I saw AI and playing around with it, even before the release of 2022 with, there was Writer, there was Jarvis, there was, other programs and so on. To me, they seemed more like they were just like you mentioned, productivity tools and tools that can help you kind of do some like copy, make it a little bit faster and so on, especially if you're doing marketing. But it just seems like there's always something in education that we kind of try and just put those, square pegs in the round holes of education and just make it fit in. Like we just got to do it because it's going to help out. Because if it helps out on the outside, it's definitely going to help me out with everything here. And I do agree with you that there are some things that it will definitely make things a lot easier, possibly like some things that you may need to translate, some things that you would just need
Sure.
to, especially with the translation portion, I believe that that is be
Totally.
definitely very helpful. Or I know I had Paul Matthews here on the show stating that just different reading levels or Lexile levels just with
Mhm.
the same passages and things of that sort. So those things, but just to want to do everything on it, it can be a lot more waste of time, especially like you mentioned, if you are not putting in the right input to give you that output that you want. You can spend too many minutes or too many hours just trying to get certain things. But then I know that there are platforms that already pre-prompt for you per se, and they have a myriad of plethora of tools that are there that you just click and say, hey, I need a rubric, and I just tell it like this is what it's going to do, and then it's going to go ahead and produce it for me. And of course, it's not going to be for free. Most of these things, they have the freemium, and so those are some of the things too that talking about the adoption within many districts is something that to me also kind of worries me and concerns me, because with mass adoption and not knowing really where the industry may be going, or that uncertainty that as ChatGPT continues to change to grow, it definitely wants to be more profitable. So then as those platforms that connect to those APIs, then those prices start going up too as well. And then of course, accessibility to teachers, to districts, to schools. Now you've got, upper echelon districts that have access to this. And then, of course, smaller districts may be out of luck. But also, it, the changes in that information, as far as the knowledge cutoff date, like we were talking about. So going to Google and maybe finding something that is right on par with, 2025, the news, or something that's most recent
Mhm.
makes more sense than to just say, hey, type it in Claude and type it into ChatGPT and tell me what it gives you. And even some of these platforms, in their privacy or terms of service, it'll say knowledge cutoff date 2023. And I believe it was July 2023 for a lot of them. So we're not actually getting, or is it when they say they can search the web, but is it really
We're missing
searching the
almost 10
web?
years. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
want to ask you now on that, as far as, because I know you talk a little bit about the ethics and the data privacy and with your students. So I want to ask you, as far as some of these pitfalls, how is it that you address this with your students as you're teaching them about AI?
Yeah, totally. So, okay. So I guess I'll go through how I actually teach this with students. So, I'm really fortunate that I now teach at a university that allows us to have these types of conversations, right? These critical tech conversations. Um, so the number one place I start from is that AI is not a net neutral tool, right? Like I think sometimes we look at it, especially through the lens of, you know, well, it's a computer that's making decisions. And so it's neutral because computers can't be biased. And it's like, well, the people who program them have implicit biases that they may not even be aware of, right? And so no tool that is programmed like AI is net neutral or not biased. That's the starting point. And then the next piece of this is understanding all of the different ways that AI is non-neutral, right? So a couple of places that we can talk about this. The first is understanding the environmental impact of AI usage, right? So, we were talking about using AI versus using Google. It uses 10 times as much energy to prompt an AI than it does to do a Google search. So just energy in general, a lot greater to use AI, even for a prompt, right? Huge demand on water resources. So ultimately, when we think about AI and the environmental impacts of AI, we're talking about the data centers that are needed in order to run all of these different searches that we want to have. And when you think about it as one search, right, or one prompt, it's not that much. But the problem with generative AI is that it's not just you using it, right? We've done this mass adoption of generative AI. And so you are part of this bigger usage that is contributing to increased water usage, which is a problem because lots of people lack access to clean water. That's contributing to lots of energy uses, burning of fossil fuels. These are not neutral things. And if you don't care about that, we can also talk about the hidden labor of AI, right? So there was this study that came out right after ChatGPT, not study, but article that came out from Forbes right after ChatGPT was released to the general public. And the way that ChatGPT trained out racism, misogyny, sexism, right? All of these things that exist because ChatGPT's knowledge base is the entire internet and the internet is problematic. They paid African workers $2 an hour to be exposed to these extremely traumatic and problematic things. And it's hidden labor, right? We think, well, AI is a computer, it's a robot, but it takes people to be able to do that work. And so we can think about the environmental impacts, we can think about the hidden labor, we can also think about what groups are further marginalized by AI usage, right? So this is something that I talk about with students. One of the reasons that I refuse to use AI for grading, I think using AI for grading is incredibly problematic because number one, your K-12 students can't consent to their data being used, but also when we think about biases and how they manifest, people are like, well, AI can't tell that this is coming from, a Black student or a brown student or a female student. But there are ways that AI is biased against certain groups that are not explicit. So for example, one of the stories I talk about is Amazon used to have a hiring algorithm that was secret. They didn't tell anybody they were using it until they decided not to use it anymore. And the reason they decided not to use it anymore is because they found that the hiring algorithm was discriminating against female candidates because the knowledge base for that hiring algorithm was successful Amazon engineers who were predominantly men, right? So certain characteristics that were coming up in female resumes were not being accepted or seen as qualified simply because the knowledge base consisted mostly of men. And so there's all of these ways that AI is non-neutral, but we don't talk about it, right? And I think like that's the first piece is understanding that you can make an informed decision about when you're going to use AI personally. And if you really think about it, it's probably not as often as you're currently using it.
And I want to highlight a couple of things that you're talking about, especially that energy usage, because over the weekend, I saw somebody post and it was part of a thread where we're 2025 now and they were actually April 2025 and they posted like, oh my gosh, I just found out about how much energy is being used and so on. And of course, everybody using with the Ghibli trends and the action figure trends and all of that, they don't think about those things. So it's
Right.
just like, hey, I want to fit in. I want to do what everybody's doing. And we just follow suit and follow along. So I followed this post on this thread, and this is somebody that is very well known, but this was what they posted. And it says, here's one thing that might help though. It uses massive amounts of energy, but compared to the energy we use on meat production, it is very small, but it actually has the ability to solve this problem, which gives me hope. Eating one less hamburger a day would have a far bigger impact than using AI less. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, okay, very interesting. That sparked a huge conversation on LinkedIn, and everybody is just like posting and everything, talking about this. And, obviously it's coming more to the forefront as far as that is concerned, but there's still so much hype around it where you just had companies doing their big annual conference and showing like, hey, here's our new AI library. And now we've got this and we've got that. Really, all that hype covers all what we talked about because I remember seeing that 60 Minutes interview too about the data workers and getting paid that very, very small wage of $2 a day and the horrific things that they were seeing. It just really blew my mind. The other thing that I wanted to talk about too is as far as using the use of AI, we were talking a little bit about, you talked about grading. Obviously, we'll talk about some plagiarism detectors as we know that they
Mhm.
don't work. But I saw
They
a
don't.
recent post. I saw a recent post too as well on TikTok by somebody that I follow stating that, for example, Turnitin, we all know is plagiarism detection platform, that now they're kind of relabeling or rebranding in a way because I guess there's so much hype that these detectors don't work. Now they're saying, oh, we are an integrity checker. So now it's kind of like, well, let's flip it around. And to me, I'm thinking you're still doing the exact same thing. Now you're just relabeling for profit. And that's really what it is. And that's the way that I see it. So, what are your thoughts on plagiarism detectors? And
Ooh,
maybe now that you hear a little bit about, because I've not just heard it from Turnitin, but there's some other articles that have come up on from higher ed stating, oh, it's the integrity of education. So we can still use AI, but we want to show them how to use it with integrity. So I know it's a two-part question. There might be a lot there, but go for it.
Yeah, let's do it. So, let's talk about original Turnitin, right? The original Turnitin that's not doing AI detection, that's just doing plagiarism detection. I think it would be an irresponsible use of Turnitin to just base your interpretation of plagiarism just by looking at the percent, right? Like the percent is really like if Turnitin flags it, that is you going in and looking at what's flagged, right? That's really an indicator to you as an educator. Something about this is a little bit off. And maybe it's that the student didn't cite their sources correctly. Maybe it's that they pulled entire quotes and like, that's not really great, but they did cite it, right? Like it's really a flag for you to actually then go in and look deeply at every paper. It's a helper tool, right? Like when I taught middle school, I had 230 students. Now teaching college, I often have 120, 130 students a class. Like I don't have the ability to read every single paper that a student turns in through the lens of, is this plagiarism or not? So Turnitin for plagiarism, we'll talk about AI separately, right? But for plagiarism is a helpful tool insofar as this is a flag for me to then be able to say, this paper looks questionable. Let me look at this a little bit more deeply, right? I still think it would be irresponsible to accuse a student of plagiarism without doing that deep work yourself, right? And so the problem with AI plagiarism detectors is that since the advent, they have said there's been that disclaimer that like, we're not 100% accurate at detecting AI. And what they have found in researching a lot of these AI detectors is that they tend to be biased toward, they tend to ping more regularly incorrectly for neurodivergent students and for students whose first language is not English, right? Like there's a big thing that came out recently that was talking about how the M dash is an indicator of AI. I've always used the M dash. I love the M dash. It's one of my favorite pieces of punctuation. And so for me, again, as somebody who's understood AI, I would never use an AI detector as an indicator of anything because they say on the front end, this actually is not accurate, right? So we know that, and we know again that it's biased towards certain student groups. What I think is interesting for educators is that when you start receiving student work that is written with AI, you can see it. Like there are certain qualities that I pick up on where this doesn't necessarily sound like something a student already turned in that they wrote in class. There's an excessive use of bullet points, and all of the bullet points are formatted exactly the same way, right? With a few different words switched out. We were talking before we started recording about how sources, right? Like a good place to check if you're like, I kind of think that this might be AI is checking to see if the sources exist, because a lot of times they don't, right? They're made up sources, made up resources. And so that's like a good first step. But I think, ultimately, especially as these tools get better, they get more human, students learn how to prompt, right? There's no guarantee that it's not written by AI if you give them an assignment and they can go do it at home or they can do it on a computer where they have access to those tools. And so for me, like even at the college level, I look at having conversations around AI usage with students as just that, as starts of conversations, right? So if I suspect that a student uses AI, I'll say, hey, this doesn't sound like you, potentially, right? These parts sound like they were written by AI, right? And give them an opportunity to be upfront about it. And to be honest, like that's how I approach a lot of conversations about plagiarism anyway, right? This place of what caused the student to need to cheat, right? Because a lot of times students don't want to cheat, but they're short on time or they don't understand what they're doing. And they make a decision to plagiarize or to use AI in ways that are not necessarily acceptable. But I think like as we're navigating this, we have to stop looking at it as we're trying to find when students are using it and we're like, it's like a gotcha moment. It's really opening a conversation, especially if you are an educator that is using AI, right? If you're using AI in certain components of your classroom, but you expect your students not to be using it at all, it's a little bit of a disconnect. So, and then I think the last thing I'll say, and then I think this is a bigger conversation, right? But like, I think it forces us to be creative about how we design assignments and assessments so that it's either not possible to use AI or it's disadvantageous for students to use AI, that it actually is better for them to not use it at all.
Yeah. And you hit on a lot of great things there. The one that I really want to highlight too is, like you mentioned, the original intent of like Turnitin. And like you said, it's a flag. It's for me as a teacher to go and say, okay, I'm using this as a tool to help me give proper feedback. But I think it just goes back now to just that over reliance of, well, this is what it gave me. You cheated. That's it. I'm just going to give you the zero because this is all AI. And it's just amazing how quickly that just turned into that. And now one of the things that I see too is just a lot of platforms stating, hey, let's work on your students' writing. So as they input their own writing in their own words, this platform is going to give them that feedback immediately that they need. And I'm thinking, okay, so I know that as a teacher, it could be difficult to give feedback to maybe up to 30 kids, and maybe in some schools, just depending on the class size, but there still has to be that human component of at least checking it and saying, okay, this is the feedback that it's giving, but now let me go and do a once through. And because that over reliance, that is what scares me. And I've said this from the very beginning too, because as soon as this came in, teachers using it, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, like this output, like the very first output, it's like, oh, this is truth, this is gospel. Here you go, guys. Here's your handout. And especially like with history or science, and I'm thinking, well, whose history are you sharing? Whose science are you sharing? Because it's that confidence that this platform has my best interest in mind. And all I got to do is just plug in the standard, and it has all the information from the internet here. And it's going to be an accurate output that I'm going to be able to share. And it's really scary that a lot of teachers really see that platforms that have these pre-prompts already that you go in there. And we were mentioning and talking about it in the pre-chat, thinking that this is all completely true when their knowledge cutoff date stops at 2023. And maybe it might have moved up a couple of months, just depending on OpenAI. But people think like, hey, this is truth. And so my question always to those platforms is, well, since you are up to date, my state got new standards. Does your platform have new standards? And they're kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, you can put those in and everything should be fine. I was like, no, it's not. I need to know that you are giving proper information, because then you're going to be teaching or creating something that the students don't need to learn, or maybe it's not presented that way when it comes time to learning it. And of course, for state testing. Then another thing that I saw is when ChatGPT was doing the images, people were like, they showed a picture of a water cycle and somebody said, oh, wow, this is the most amazing thing. Look at what ChatGPT can do. And that whole thing was wrong. The water cycle, image was incorrect. And somebody said, well, it's just a little incorrect. I was like, no, there's no little incorrect. It's either incorrect or it's not. And this one was incorrect too. And I'm thinking to myself, you're posting this with just, here you go, guys, look what I just created. I'm thinking to myself, that's just an example of what I mean, not checking that output. And like you said, many times it's going to take you a lot longer to just say, okay, look, my book already has this, or guess what? My content coordinator already created this handout, and all I need to do is just tweak it and, make it a little bit more engaging, add a hook to it, and I'm done. But it's almost something like, oh, I did it. OpenAI or ChatGPT or this platform did it for me, and I'm good to go and I'm ready. And that's kind of just so scary for me. So let's talk about AI literacy for all. All right. So I want to ask you, everybody talks about AI literacy. We've been talking about the internet, interwebs, talking about AI literacy, and they talk about it so much. Many people, they're still considered to be behind. And if you're not using AI in your classroom, you're doing a disservice to your kids. So I want to ask you, as a practitioner, as an educator in the classroom, do you feel that your maybe small use of AI is going to be hurting your kids in their future jobs? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I actually I think it's a really interesting conversation because I think the way that most people are interpreting AI literacy is that every student everywhere should be putting things in to a computer, should be like going in and prompting ChatGPT or Claude or the Edu approved, version of it. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. So I think about how we teach AI in computer science. And for anybody who's watching and you're like, how do I bring AI into my classroom? Computer science teachers and computer science curriculum providers have been teaching about AI since before the advent of mass use of generative AI. And there are so many good unplugged lessons that help students to understand the ethics of it for sure, but also the tech of it, understanding how does AI actually work? What are you doing when you put a prompt in? Where is that information coming from, right? What is the basic version of an LLM, a large language model? How does that actually generate information? Which I think is a really good piece of background for everybody, right? When we talk about AI literacy, I think a lot of people are taking that to mean students prompting AI. And I just think number one, for certain age groups, that's super irresponsible. And number two, it's not actually AI literacy, right? AI literacy is understanding the how, understanding the drawbacks of it, right? Potentially when you should and shouldn't use it. And then getting to the point where we now can write our prompts. We now can use it for, research or creating outlines or however you want to use it, helping you study, right? Whatever way you're using AI with your student. And so I think that's a major missing component that, again, computer science teachers have been doing for a very long time. And there is a lot of great free curriculum that exists that covers that covers AI unplugged, that covers the why, covers the how, covers these ethical considerations that we should have. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, again, I think we need to be very thoughtful about when we're actually having students use AI tools, right? So for example, if I'm teaching, college students, they're adults, right? They are of age, they can consent to their data being used, they can consent to their work being input into a GPT or whatever else. And so I feel really good about having structured ways for them to use AI and understand what AI can and cannot do, right? And I might feel okay about that with high school students, right? But even then, they're children. They can't consent. They don't fully understand what information they're sharing, how that information is being used. I think a big question for me when I think about a lot of these EdTech platforms is, okay, yeah, you can grade my students' work, but you're using that work to further build your product, to develop your product, to make more money. My kids can't consent to that, right? And so, I think about, let's say we want students to start learning how to prompt, to start practicing how to prompt. That might be something where students are writing those prompts and the teacher is modeling it, right? It's on the board, on the, whatever board you're using. And you as the teacher are actually going through how to create prompts, how to use that to get information, ways that you might, tweak it, which again, another positive of that is that we now have we're now limiting the number of prompts that we're putting in because we're looking at it through a full class lens versus 30 kids in a class all inputting into a machine at the same time. So I think it's widening our understanding of what AI literacy is. And also, and here's the thing, this is not new to education, right? In math, we teach kids how to do things on paper before we let them use a calculator. We teach kids to write a draft, handwritten before they start learning how to put it into computer, right? They do an outline before they start writing the full draft. Way back when I took my first coding class, Mr. Rose, shout out to Fearless Day, apparently he's still a teacher. But Mr. Rose would not let me get on a computer to write Java unless I could handwrite it and not have errors. So we see this a lot in education where you have to understand the basics before you can use the tool. And I think a lot of education is looking at it backwards. We're saying, put the kids on the tool, and that is AI literacy. That's not AI literacy. That's using a tool without fully understanding how or why we're using it. You know?
No, I agree with you 100% because it's something that I've seen from friends, and it's just because it's like they don't know what they don't know yet. And sometimes maybe they do, but it's just like, you know what? It doesn't matter. This makes my job a lot easier. And they're just willing to just, kind of just let that take over and say, hey, I'm being more productive. I'm finishing this. I'm doing this. But later on, it's like they don't see the cost or the dangers of that until it's too late. And for me, it's just really being very cautious with how you're using it, when you're using it. And like you said, I always feel like there's a time and a place to be able to use that tool effectively. So, kind of as we start wrapping up, I want to ask you something that kind of is a nice segue into that because we talked about how AI can become an over reliance for even students as well, like through your experience and being able to see even that in higher ed and just kind of questioning things and saying like, hey, and giving them the opportunity to say, okay, let me go ahead and rewrite or giving them a second chance. So, but I want to ask you, in your experience and maybe in your thought, with so many tools that are out there, how can educators still encourage the students to maintain agency in their learning process and really use those critical thinking skills when they can easily just jump on? Like I said, I was looking for a citation or just some reference and somebody just said, well, put it in Claude and it'll tell you how to do it. I was like, but it's not accurate. So what are some suggestions from you and your experience on how students can still maintain their critical thinking skills and not be over reliant on the tech?
Yeah. So I think, and again, when I think a lot about AI, I think about a lot of things related to AI, and it goes back to what we already do with good teaching, right? Which is even before AI came onto the scene, right? We were really critical about how many different pieces of tech we were introducing to students, right? And we were being thoughtful about like, okay, well, if I, and we were talking about the citations, right? If I were going to introduce a citation machine, which existed before mass use of generative AI, right? Where it would just, you put in your information, output a nice little formatted bibliography for you, right? I'm going to introduce my students to one tool that they can use for that, right? And before they use that tool, I'm going to teach them how to do it manually, right? They need to understand the why before they're using the tech that's going to help them. And so I think teachers thinking about, well, how do we give students agency, but still build their critical thinking? One of my favorite people to follow who has been kind of critical about AI is Shanae Bond. I don't know if you know her. Hey, Mrs. Bond. She's on. She's very active on Twitter. But one of the things she talks about is, I'm just gonna have more handwritten assignments, right? Like she's an English teacher, and she's like, instead of putting students in a position where potentially they're going to use an AI tool in a way that I don't want them to, I'm going to be very critical about how I structure assignments so that it's actually not advantageous for them to use AI. It's more advantageous for them to do it the way that, that I want them to do it, which is either handwritten or, they're just doing it on a Google Doc, right? Like normal. So I think for teachers, number one is understanding that student agency existed before we had the mass advent of generative AI. I was teaching student agency. I was teaching teachers student agency and student voice and student choice in 2017, right? With no tech. Like you can build in student agency totally on paper. Okay. So student agency and AI are not synonymous. Certainly AI seems to make student agency easier and does in some ways, but you can create a classroom where students have voice and choice and control over their learning without any tech at all. Right. And so I think like that's number one, is that those things are not synonymous. And then number two is like modeling what it looks like to be thoughtful. Right. So when we're thinking about what tools we're going to introduce in our classroom, that when we introduce that tool, students already know how to do that task without the tool. The tool is going to add value. It's going to make it easier. It's going to make, their output more robust, whatever it is, but you've been thoughtful about why you're introducing this particular tool. And it's very clear to the students, right? They're not being given, here's 10 different tools you can choose from. You as the teacher, you as the adults in the room have exercised that caution and thoughtfulness in order to make it easier for your students, because they don't student agency doesn't mean that they can choose between 10 tools. They do not have the capacity to do that at this point. That is a very advanced skill. That is still your job as a teacher. So I think if you're choosing to bring in any tool into your classroom, knowing that part of your job is to be the curator of those tools, and that we are being very intentional about communicating why we're introducing a tool into our classroom, whether it's AI or not.
I love it. I love it. Well, Jen, it's been an amazing, amazing chat. Thank you so much for just your insight and your experience that you brought into this conversation. Obviously, being a middle school, high school, and then higher ed teacher, and then your background in computer science. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And, just a lot of gems, a lot of great things to digest. And I know that our listeners will definitely find a little something there that they can sprinkle onto what they are already doing great. So please make sure, guys, all of you listening, make sure you follow Jen, especially on TikTok. She is huge on TikTok. So under Strategic Classroom, at Strategic Classroom. So follow Jen right there. She'll share some great videos, time hacks, great things for a lot of you as educators, just to help you and just be more productive and more efficient. And it's amazing. 139,000 plus followers, 5 million likes. It's amazing. And she was a guest here on my EdTech Live. I feel honored to have a big TikTok star here on our show. And she's fantastic. And just the way that you see her, she's very genuine, very authentic. And that's the content that you'll see. So please,
Nice.
Yes, please make sure you follow her for sure. I promise you're going to love everything that she puts out. So Jen, thank you so much. But before we wrap up, Jen, I always love to end the show with the last 3 questions. So hopefully you're ready to go. So I want to ask you, as we know, every superhero has a weakness or a pain point. And for Superman, Kryptonite was that weakness and pain point. So I want to ask you, and since we're talking about AI, well, I'm going to flip it on that and just say, in the current state of education, what would you say is your current AI Kryptonite?
I think it's grading. I have a lot of big feelings when it comes to using AI for grading, and I sometimes get a little bit too invested. So I will say using AI for grading is the thing that kind of sets me off. I get a little bit passionate.
There you go. Great answer. All right. Question number 2. If you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
The best quote that I think every teacher needs to hear is that your worth is not defined by your productivity. So a lot of times, we are just trying to get it all done, and it can make us feel like we're not good teachers if we don't get through everything. And who you are as a teacher is so much more than what you get done or what you don't get done. And so I actually, for a very long time, I had that as my phone background because I just needed to be reminded of it all the time.
Nice. Excellent message. Love it. All right. And the last question, if you can trade places with one person for a single day, who would that be and why?
I'm going to pick my almost 4-year-old, Jack. He is 3.5, almost 4. And I just would love to go back I watch him play and just get so excited about everything, right? He's very into magnetiles and baseball right now. And I wish I could go back to that constant state of discovery. It's very cool to watch, and I bet it's very fun to be in. So,
Oh, I love that. That is a great answer. Well, Jen, thank you so much again for just sharing your voice here. As you know, we do what we do for all our amazing guests that listen is just to amplify creator, educator, professional voices. And your voice is definitely a great voice within our space. So thank you so much for being an amazing guest. And for our audience members that are checking this episode out, please make sure you visit our website at myedtech.life, where you can check out this amazing episode and the other 322 episodes.
Ooh.
So we're excited. It's 5 years in the making, a lot of great episodes. And I promise you, you're definitely going to find some little nuggets there that you can sprinkle on to what you're already doing great. So thank you so much. And if you're not following us on socials, what are you waiting for? Please make sure that you follow us on all major social platforms at My EdTech Life. And if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up and share the content, because we would love for all those wonderful AI algorithms to get our content out to many more people. But as always, my friends, don't forget, until next time, stay techie.